the meeting open, and we are being recorded, so we all want to click continue. Hi everyone, I'm Larry Horn. In case you missed the non-event of the passing of the virtual gavel, I have stealthily taken over stewardship as president of the LSA for 2021 at some point over the last 2 days. And I hereby express my gratitude to my predecessor, Marianne Methuen, both for the superb guidance she provided to the Society during an annus horribilis and for her unwavering commitment to the peaceful and democratic transition of power. I now welcome everyone to the open forum designed for the exploration of issues related to the reports by the two task forces that were established by the LSA Executive Committee in response to the questions sparking debate among the membership over the course of the last 6 months. The Executive Committee set up the two task forces under the leadership of our two most recent past presidents, Brian Joseph and Penelope Eckert. The task force on media resources was charged with rethinking and rebuilding a structure for an outward-facing resource for media and journalists to have questions about language addressed by knowledgeable LSA members. The task force on procedures for evaluating professional conduct was charged with establishing clear policies and procedures for grievances and allegations of any professional misconduct that violates the LSA ethics statement and the LSA civility policy. Neither task force was charged with acting on specific concerns or complaints about any individual misconduct. Rather, they were tasked with recommending procedures, respectively, for creating a media resource list and for acting on complaints as they are brought forward to the LSA. We received the task force reports in late December with gratitude and had the opportunity to review and discuss them at the recent annual meeting. In anticipation of today's open forum, no decisions were made regarding any of the recommendations. We welcome your feedback and input. In addition to these recommendations, the Executive Committee has also considered the role of two LSA subcommittees in addressing concerns about conduct on social media. As a result, the EC has made various revisions to the charge and responsibilities of the already existing Public Relations Committee. A new chair, Kristen Siret, has been appointed to lead the Public Relations Committee, and we plan to issue a call for new members to join the committee. In addition, the Executive Committee is instantiating a new committee focused on its external social media practices. The charge and responsibilities for the new Social Media Committee have been approved and are available on the LSA website for inspection by members. We plan to issue a call for nominations of new members to serve on this committee later this month. We are also keenly aware of other issues around power differentials and generational perspectives that have come to the fore in parallel with the task force deliberations. The Executive Committee has been considering informal proposals from the leaders of a number of LSA committees, including our student representatives, to make structural changes to our governance model to support the engagement of junior scholars in the Society's activities to a greater extent than has been possible so far. We hope to arrive at consensus on some of those proposals at our Executive Committee meetings later this winter and spring. We welcome the recommendations of the two task forces while recognizing that many of these recommendations will require further consideration before they can be implemented. We are also aware that neither report recommends a specific process for the sanctioning of members or participants in LSA events for misconduct. The Executive Committee will meet again in February to map out a plan for the implementation of recommendations and to consider other mechanisms we might pursue to advance the goals of ensuring the highest standards of professional conduct among the LSA membership and the broader linguistic community. I will be turning the floor over to Brian Joseph now. He's the chair of the Media Task Force, and he will provide a summary of their report. His presentation will be followed by that of Penelope Eckert, chair of the Professional Conduct Task Force, who will give a synopsis of their findings. Following Brian's and Penny's reports, the floor will be open for a moderated discussion to which attendees can participate by activating the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and you can do that at any time from here on. So, Brian?
Great, thank you very much, Larry. So I want to first mention that a couple members of the task force are here, in quotes, with us, Lena Howe, Chris Kennedy, and Allison Reed. But I'll be delivering the summary of our recommendations. Larry has given the history, the relevant history of the task force, and reiterated what our charge was, namely to rethink and rebuild a structure for an outward-facing resource for the media and journalists to have questions about language answered by knowledgeable LSA members, and that was what we worked on. Our first decision was to consider, think about, and then reaffirm ultimately that such a resource was in fact useful and important. Among other things, it is consistent with the LSA's strategic plan for public engagement. But mostly we aimed at producing a framework for the development of this resource page. It will be on the website, so we thought of it as in terms of a page on the website. Providing some guidelines for how to do it, with the details of implementation turned over to the newly reconstituted Public Relations Committee that Larry referred to. With regard to such issues as nominating members for being on this resource page, for the vetting of the nominees, and for training if that proves practicable, and such matters. For the most part, we took a fairly broad view of how nominations should take place. We want to aim to have as broad and inclusive a set of nominees. This is in keeping with the LSA's interests in promoting diversity and inclusiveness. We did talk about the kinds of nomination materials that would be provided and the kinds of criteria that would be used for assessing nominations. We opted in the direction of past experience with giving interviews, a track record of translating findings into everyday language, and a willingness to be available in some way within 24 hours of being contacted, and demonstrated expertise in some relevant subject area within linguistics. But the details of how those would be implemented, we decided to leave to the Public Relations Committee. There were still some sort of leftover issues that we thought about and addressed, if not completely resolving them, with regard to the status of someone who is listed on this media resource page. No matter what we believe that they would be representing the field of linguistics, not representing the Linguistic Society, but there is, of course, the almost de facto status as a representative of the LSA because they're vetted in some way by the LSA. We wanted to be clear that they're giving opinions about the field of linguistics and not representing the LSA policies or decisions in any direct way. Maybe the biggest remaining issue was that of how to depopulate the page. We've spent a lot of time thinking about how to populate it with appropriate representatives of our field. But we ultimately decided to see what the Penelope's task force would be deciding, and to let the depopulation of the page sort of follow from the recommendations that they made. So these our recommendations and hers sort of go together in that regard. But it was very clear that we felt the Public Relations Committee could certainly make recommendations to remove people for cause, in particular if they didn't carry out the obligations that would be expected of someone on the list, such as responding to requests from media in a timely manner. And that's basically the set of our recommendations. And in summary, I hope you have read and can continue to read the full report if you are interested. And I'll turn things over now to Penelope. So take it away.
God, I've never been called Penelope this many times.
I would have called you Penny, but I thought it would be too informal.
Only my family calls me Penelope. So now we're family. Okay, so let me begin by introducing our task force. Most of them are here. It's an amazing group of people to work with. John Baugh from Washington University, Jeff Good from SUNY Buffalo, Sharon Inkelis, University of California, Berkeley, Gaia Yaros, University of Massachusetts, Norma Mendoza Denton from the University of California at Los Angeles, Jennifer Neese from Georgetown University, Gregory Ward from Northwestern University, and Tracy Weldon, University of South Carolina. Now, the document we're presenting here is a result of hours of meetings and online discussion from September through December, and a survey to which 366 people responded, roughly reflecting the demographics of our society's membership. Now, it doesn't take a survey to know that young linguists face a much more difficult professional life than the older generations. I don't need to remind the older people here that they, like me, began their careers at a time when there were jobs and money. And for the really older ones of us, there was no such thing as a search. We got our first jobs by word of mouth. Younger generations of linguists are encountering a weakened academic economy. They are more diverse, although not nearly diverse enough, and more very vulnerable in every way. This calls for a society that recognizes the responsibility of senior linguists to support and protect students and early career linguists, and to understand that social change brings ideological change and greater sensitivity to issues of race, gender, class, ability, sexuality, and raises new ones. So this principle underlies our recommendations. So we recognize that there's overwhelming support for sanctions in principle. How to adjudicate cases in a manner that is just and legal is an extremely complicated issue. So complicated that many professional societies, including the American Anthropological Association, which has far more resources than the LSA, have decided to not engage in adjudication or sanctions, but to focus on education. We have not ruled out adjudication, but any system involving sanctions must be placed in a broader context of support. And sanctions are only the last resort measure in that broader system. We've started with recommendations for that broader system, which begins with raising awareness, dealing with problems and instances of misconduct as they occur, and keeping a record to serve as guidance for further measures. For the moment, we leave it to the executive committee to appoint an appropriate ad hoc committee to adjudicate each instance of egregious misconduct if and as it arises. Now, our report recommends a range of measures to raise awareness, provide education, and more generally, create a supportive climate, not only at LSA events, but in the field in general. Our recommendations include measures to ensure constructive and unabusive reviews of journal and grant submissions and student papers, best practices for social media, from social media to departmental governance, and bystander intervention in the case of misconduct. This is just a small number. Now, one could say that the establishment of a safe space group is at the core of our recommendations. It's a carefully selected group of senior linguists, and by senior, we mean people who are sufficiently secure in their jobs that they can afford to do the right thing. Senior linguists who, not as individually, but as a group, will serve as a resource for people who feel they have been the target of misconduct in any professional space. The Safe Space group will provide confidential support, advice, and recommendations, but not direct intervention. They will bring cases that they consider egregious to the executive committee for potential action. The Safe Space group will keep a record of all incidents in order to track patterns of behavior, which they will report on regularly to the executive committee and the membership. This will guarantee that we will base our practices on our actual needs and that our practices will not become static. Now, in the interest of having maximal time for questions and discussion, I'm not going to go into the details of our report. Since it's available to you online, I see that David has put the link in the chat. With that, I think we can move directly to a discussion. Larry.
Okay, thanks, Penny, and thanks, Brian, for your contributions to the discussion. I encourage everyone to refresh your memories on what is actually in the task force reports. So we're now shifting into Q&A mode, and accordingly, anyone interested in asking a question to panelists should use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The moderator will be Executive Committee member Chris Kennedy, who notes that you should feel free to upvote questions so we know which issues people are most interested in having addressed. We will bring attendees on as panelists, and we've already done that in some cases, so you can ask your questions in person. So when you ask a question, then you will be spotlit and people can see you asking them if you choose. You should try to observe Grice's brevity submaxim to increase the number of questions we can get through before the end of the session. Anyone who prefers to ask a question anonymously can indicate this within the Q&A function, and then Chris will ask the question on your behalf. So without further ado, I turn the rostrum over to you via Chris. So please chime in.
We have one question from an anonymous attendee, but I'm not, it's a little bit following the maxim a little too much. I think it's flouting the maxim. I'm not sure exactly. I would like to ask the person to re-answer the question. It was in response. The question is, including names, question mark. And I believe it had to do with the role that the Safe Space Committee was going to be playing, but I think we need a little slightly more detail in the question to make sure we know exactly what it is. So I'm going to ask whoever that is to come back to that one, and instead I'm going to bring Jessica Rett in to ask a question. So give me 1 second here to bring her online. As I scroll through the names.
Guys, I'm here. Hi, thanks. What a tremendous effort. I'm really proud of the LSA for taking all of this as seriously as you guys are. It was all a bit quick for me, and I'm just still reading through the reports and things, so please forgive me if this is covered explicitly somewhere, but the social media committee was established in 2020, is still in formation. What does that mean about who is currently at the helm of our various social media accounts?
I could answer one part of your question. I'm not sure, Penny, I don't know whether you want to, or Larry. Shall I go ahead and say something?
It's your committee.
Well, it sort of is and sort of isn't. The social media committee is a new committee that the LSA has created, and so it's not actually it wasn't under the aegis, or it wasn't in the bailiwick of the media resource page task force. But
I think from the Public Relations Committee.
right, yeah, I was going to say, so the Public Relations Committee has been reconstituted with a new chair, as Larry mentioned. Kristen Surratt is the chair of the Public Relations Committee, and the charge of the Public Relations Committee has been narrowed somewhat. I don't remember the exact details, but it has been narrowed somewhat. So I think the question that said, are there is the public relations person? There really isn't a public relations person per se. But if what you meant was the chair of the Public Relations Committee, yes, there's been a turnover there, but the chairs are typically appointed just for 1 year anyway. So this was an appropriate time to as we were reconstituting the committee anyway, to seek a new chair. Does that answer your question, Jessica?
Yeah, I phrased it differently in writing than I did in person, so that answers all of them. Thanks.
Okay.
Good. And Jessica, I just wanted to say, you know, the staff right now are in charge of the LSA social media accounts, and we're only posting information about the LSA until this new committee gets off the ground. And there's a whole set of procedures for this new committee to follow in terms of thinking about external social media activities. So all of that's in the offing, but for now, the staff are in charge, and that's what's going on.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to the question. I'm gonna try to do two things at once, which is take Jessica off and come back to first I'll come back to the question that was asked earlier, the including names question. So Claire Bauern clarified that this appeared at the time that Penny was this was from an anonymous attendee. It appeared at the time Penny was talking about keeping track of complaints. So the question is, I believe the question is, will this group be keeping track of names of people that have been complained about? Is keeping track across the LSA individual in general, or across individuals?
I'm not, yeah. Yeah, we didn't, this is one issue that we didn't actually make a final decision about. On the one hand, but basically, if there are individuals who have multiple complaints about them, at some point somebody might want to tell them. My inclination would be that names would be retained in a very completely confidential manner. But that is something I think that is going to have to be part of the actual decisions about how to implement the recommendations of our task force. Does anybody else on the task force have anything they want to contribute? We did discuss this. So if people on the task force want to talk, do they have to raise their hand, or can they just unmute themselves, Chris?
They can unmute and I can bring them into spotlight.
So I would be interested in knowing how people feel about that. I don't just mean people in the task force, all the people out there who have come to listen to us.
Maybe we can let people think about how to answer that. We have another question that was at the top of the queue from Heidi Harley. Let me first change the interpreters who need to switch. 1 second. Next question that was upvoted by a number of people is coming from Heidi Harley. Heidi, can you unmute and ask that question, please?
Hi, yeah, thanks everyone for all your work and time and effort. I love the Safe Space Committee, and I love the idea of the society having a group of people who people can turn to in extremis. But the kinds of issues that sort of sparked all of this were not of that type. They were sort of more about kind of systemic issues or small things that cumulatively were revealing challenges that made, you know, anyway, sort of on a general, more systemic basis. Do we have a vision for how we could address those kinds of situations?
My feeling is that the Safe Space Committee is not just for big problems, but for as a body to sort of consider everything that poses a problem for members. So I wouldn't say that, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, the way it was put, or the way it was described, is that like an individual would come with a little question or concern, but you know, I presume like 20 individuals could come. Like the Safe Space Committee would consider things like the open letter,
Yes.
try to address them or respond to them or something. Like the ambit of the committee is not about helping individuals navigate challenges.
That's right. It is a place for things to go. I would say, I would hope that there would be groups of people who would bring stuff to the Safe Space Committee. Because an important part of that is building a larger picture of what kind of a society we've got. Yeah. And in fact, these things, when I talk about the egregious things that they'll pass on to the executive committee, that means that hopefully most of what they see won't be, you know, one person who's, you know, been attacked by their advisor or, you know, stuff like that. Okay.
Thanks very much, Penny.
I think there's Tracy Weldon has added an answer to Heidi's question as well in the if I'm understanding the flow of the Q&A correctly. Perhaps Tracy would want to talk about to say that.
Tracy?
I need to make, Tracy is, hang on. Tracy should be able to unmute and talk now.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Tracy.
I will bring her up.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that another part of our proposal talked about hosting regular workshops at LSA institutes and meetings, and also online resources, webinars, and the like that can over time contribute to educating members of the LSA about best practices, making us aware of implicit biases and issues of systemic racism that are perhaps not always necessarily visible to everyone. So I think that, you know, goes some way to answering Heidi's question as well about the ways that we're hoping to sort of address systemic racism that go beyond the safe space group. Just wanted to share.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Tracy. And also I think there is a whole, as we emphasize that education is a central part of this, the Safe Space Committee is not completely separate from that as well, so that stuff gets fed from Safe Space into what kinds of workshops, what kinds, and so on do we need. Yeah.
Okay. The next question is coming from Mitcho Erlewine. I'm going to bring him on.
I think I can unmute myself.
You can unmute yourself, and I want to bring you into focus. Where are you? Where did you go? There you are. Here you are.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you all very much for the report and the work that went behind this. I formulated a question, so I'm basically going to read that, but let me pull that up. I appreciated that some generational differences and distinct concerns and perspectives of junior scholars were recognized at the beginning of Penny's statement. But in light of this, I have some concerns regarding the Space Safe group being comprised of senior scholars. I appreciate and understand the advantage of limiting the group to those with relative job security who can then do the right thing. But at the same time, I wonder if, for example, it would be possible to include more junior scholars, perhaps with an option to keep their involvement anonymous or confidential, so that such perspectives are also present in that group's conversations. Thank you.
Thanks. I think that's an interesting idea. We were thinking more about, it's about time that senior scholars started taking hold of their responsibility for younger people. But I understand that there's certainly something to be said for having a wider age range of input in those discussions. Yeah, that's an interest. That's a very welcome suggestion. Anybody else want to? I mean, I was hoping this would be a discussion rather than sort of question answer, because really what we're trying to do is to, you know, the task force has come up with these ideas, and now is our opportunity to sort of flesh them out. So I don't know if anybody else wants to say something about this.
Norma has a,
Yeah.
wants to jump in.
Hey, Norma.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, thank you to the LSA membership for giving us the opportunity to talk with you about all this. And I think we very much envision the task force to be like the kind of opening salvo, right? Like the first volley in addressing a lot of these larger issues, so that, you know, it wasn't the case that it would always be constituted by senior scholars. It was just the beginning of it. And I think that part of the reason that we suggested that, if my memory serves, is that we didn't want to put the onus of the work on people who might be having to negotiate so many other things, right? Like when you're just coming out, like finding a new job, like we don't want to make this more work for junior faculty and for graduate students who are just basically people are trying to get to the next step in their career. So so that's the idea behind a committee like this, that you know, at some point you're able to say to your institution or even to the LSA, there's this situation, we have a problem, we need to do something. But I totally agree with the question or the suggestion that we should have a more diverse viewpoint. And And yeah, I'm extremely on board with that. Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting because the idea, it seems to me, is that because we're talking about a group whose job is to provide support, and that a younger perspective might be able to provide kinds of support. So one of the things I might want to hear from you is what you think that having younger people on the Safe Space Committee contributes to the committee. I mean, since we were thinking mostly in terms of protecting younger people from a whole variety of problems with being on this committee. Yeah.
Could I speak to that?
Yeah, please.
Is that right? I think, well, first of all, I mean, I was sort of trying to use the language in the report by referring to senior versus junior scholars. I don't think it's necessarily something about age, but there may be certain generational differences, but I think when I say junior, I mean scholars who may be younger, but also may be, as you said, in a less secure job situation, or maybe more attuned to the dynamics of social media, say, that doesn't necessarily directly track, those dimensions may be independent. But I think by bringing, I think it's important to bring those perspectives in directly into the safe space group conversation, as well as similar task forces in the future. And I think that although as a sort of relatively more junior scholar myself, I appreciate and understand the sentiment behind wanting to protect junior scholars potentially from this kind of role. I think that's a little, I think that, with all due respect, I think that feeling is slightly misplaced. Like, I think it's slightly patronizing, in that demonstrably, there are many junior scholars who care enough about this organization and about our field to speak up, some anonymously, some not anonymously, and actually make their voices heard already in various constructive ways in order to raise these issues. And so I don't think systematically choosing, for example, through this recommendation to say that those junior scholars can be left out because we're protecting them, I think that could easily be taken the wrong way. And I think it's not constructive. And especially also because the field will move on and these junior scholars will become established scholars, and we want them or us or whoever actively involved in these conversations. So I think that limiting it to senior scholars, while I understand the stated motivation, I think it's potentially very problematic. So that's a stronger form of what I was trying to say.
Great, thanks. Gaia has her hand up.
Gaia, yeah, is this a follow-up, Gaia?
Yeah. Should I go ahead?
Go ahead, please. Yeah, and just let me mention, we are getting a good big chunk of questions in the Q&A that I'm trying to work through. So
I think I'll be brief.
Yep, let me bring you up forward. Go ahead. Go ahead, Gaia.
Yeah, so I think I agree with the others that this is a welcome suggestion to have the input of the broader and diverse group. I think just to highlight, I think something Penny already said, but just to highlight a complication that would be good to discuss further is there's protecting them in the sense of not forcing work upon them, but there's also the question of making sure that these scholars whose positions are not as secure don't have that there are no repercussions against them for acting openly and honestly. And so I think that's a tricky thing, to make sure that there is not, that risk is not put on them.
I should point out, so we've defined senior scholars not in terms of age, but as those who are sufficiently secure in their careers to be able to take justified action without fear of reprisal. And all other peoples we call junior for lack of better terms. Terms really kind of aren't very good. Okay.
There are a couple more issues at the top of the question queue having to do with generational themes, but since they're slightly different, I want to move to one asked by an anonymous attendee that's been sitting in the queue for a while and is also at the top of the list. And that question is, what are the proposed mechanisms to address the possibility that a member of the Safe Space Committee is someone who would otherwise be reported to said committee?
Well, that's why we were saying that the committee has to be chosen very carefully. And in fact, one of our recommendations was that a certain number of members of this committee be nominated by, quote, more junior linguists. I mean, yeah, that's a very, a tricky question, but I think it's really a matter of how the members of these committees actually get selected.
I had a question from Richard Larson, but I've lost him on my list. I don't see him here anymore. I'll try to find him again. So the next question, I'm going to bring in Catherine Anderson to ask the next question. Catherine, you should be able to start your video and unmute.
To Carolyn?
Oh, sorry, Carolyn. No, oh, I put Carolyn in. I meant to put Catherine. Sorry. Give me a second.
Having fun? Are you having fun, Chris?
Can't find Catherine in the participant list. She's asking questions, but I'm not seeing her name here.
There she is.
Do we find her?
Yeah, I see her. Oh.
There she is. Okay, good.
Hello. Thanks everyone for this work, for taking this seriously. My question is a question / suggestion that goes back to Michael's comments earlier. I was wondering if the Safe Space Committee, or whatever it's called, is anticipated to have a role that's not just responding to complaints, but sort of actively monitoring climate. And one way to do that is to be attentive to what's happening on social media. It's the impression, I'm kind of a mid-career person. I'm old in internet years, but young in LSA terms. And one impression that folks on Twitter had in the summer was that the senior folks were dismissing Twitter as irrelevant when a lot of important conversations were actually happening on Twitter. And so I wonder, that was my question about the Safe Space Committee. Is it just meant to respond to complaints, or is there a broader kind of monitoring, paying attention to culture role envisioned for that committee?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Does anybody else on the task force have an answer that they're dying to make, or a comment that they're dying to make at the moment? Norma.
Norma does. Bring her up.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that, yeah, I'm completely on board with that. I think part of I'm not sure that should be part of the Safe Space Committee, but definitely the LSA needs to to basically level up on its internet and Twitter and social media game. And we are aware that this is an issue, and we are aware that as we continue as an organization, it's extremely important to branch out in these ways. And so I encourage those of you who want to participate in the LSA to volunteer to run for these positions in the exec committee, because if you don't do it, I just don't know that it will get done. It's, you know, as somebody who is on Twitter and not totally able to be on Twitter all the time in a way that I would want, I can see that it's a huge problem and that we are really lacking in expertise at the exec committee level. So I invite you to please help run to be in these positions, because we can't delegate it. And as Allison said, right, it has been run by staff so far, and you can't delegate this kind of thing to somebody who's in an internship, right? Because they'll just pick out like, what's the cool thing that, you know, Science Magazine said about language, and they'll put that up there, and then the membership will be like, oh, like that didn't work, right? So yeah, so this is the kind of thing where as an organization, we all need a lot of help. So thank you for bringing it up.
Yeah,
If I may, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, if I might interject here, the new social media committee, when we talked about its formation and creation a few months ago, we definitely meaning on the executive committee, we definitely recognize the lack of social media expertise and the amongst us, and the need for people on that social media committee to be tuned in and to know what's going on. So that might be the right channel, if you will, through the or conduit for the LSA to understand what the climate is, as you put it, Catherine.
But I think the question of abusive conduct by LSA members or other linguists on social media directed toward other linguists on social media, and the LSA's role in monitoring that or taking action on it is kind of at the heart of what I heard Catherine raising, and what I saw in another Q&A is, you know, are we gonna take action about that kind of misconduct? And I don't think we fully responded to that question.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Actually, certainly, so one of the questions would be, who's going to bring something like people behaving badly on Twitter or on social media is of concern, has to be of concern to the Safe Space Committee. And so then the question is, do we have a sufficiently robust handle on social media that these things will, so in this case, we're talking about a bunch of people are upset about something they see on social media and they bring it to the Safe Space Committee. There's so much going on social media, on social media. The question is, what do we have to do to really have it covered?
Okay.
I could see, for instance, with regard to the media resource page, that if in giving an answer about some topic, the person being queried says in some way it's dismissive of or worse towards the views that some LSA member take. I could see that as representing cause for removal from that list, because I think that treating our fellow linguists with respect is part of an important part of interacting with the media, with journalists and such. So that's not, I know that's not exactly what this question was getting at, but that would be a dimension to be relevant to the media resource list, for instance.
There was a question about the name Safe Space Committee, but
Yeah.
it's been deleted, so I'm not going to ask that one. There is a second, so the next question at the top of the list is an anonymous question. A question from an anonymous attendee, so let me read it. Hello, and thank you for your work on these issues. Having not been able to read the reports fully yet, may I ask if current problematic conduct towards LSA members and junior linguists on social media will be considered by either of these committees towards whether an individual remains as a media expert or not? I understand that there are things being done to track complaints, but is that connected to this decision? Or are they treated as a separate issue that does not factor into that decision?
That's sort of the question I was addressing. I think Allison drew attention to that question. Could I say something about that question that isn't directly an answer? I hope that I understand the reference to media expert, because that was the term that has generally or sort of informally been used for the people on the list, but I on the media resource list. But I would like for us to move away from the term media expert, because it gave I think some wrong impressions about what it meant to be a resource for journalists and media. I'm not being dismissive in any way of the use of the term in the question, because this is a conventional term that has come to be used. But we in the media resource task force, we tried assiduously to not to use that term, and it doesn't appear in the report at all, for instance, for exactly that reason.
Okay, Claire Bourne says that she can still see the question that disappeared on my screen about the Safe Space Committee name. So I'm going to try to summarize it. When I remember, she gives me some helpful summary here. So the worry is that the name Safe Space Committee is not a good name because this term has become politicized, and the worry is that this will be mocked. It'll cause a segment of people not to take it seriously just because of its name. The comparison would be something like Snowflake Committee. So I think, so we can maybe have some thoughts on that, whether we are open to rethinking a good name, and maybe somewhere in this thread we can have some suggestions. We can crowdsource a good name for that committee. I think this is a legitimate.
I mean, none of us are wedded to the name. Similarly, the civility document has been mocked for its name as well. And I'm responsible for that. And I'd be happy to change the name of that one as well. So as for the Snowflake comment, no comment.
Okay, we have a very specific question here from an anonymous attendee. Can I ask how this proposal / how the LSA plans to deal with the particular complaint about Steven Pinker's professional conduct that was raised in the open letter?
Isn't that the question we just had before? But without names?
Without the name.
Larry Beckman. It's been voted, it's at the top of the list, so maybe people feel that it hasn't been sufficiently answered.
Yeah, I think that Allison spoke to it, kind of. Brian spoke to it. I think the question of it seems to me that on Twitter there is quite a bit of people showing serious disrespect towards each other, and I would say that is something that we do not accept as professional conduct, as good professional conduct. I think there are a number of issues in the Pinker issue, though, that my goodness. Sorry. I mean, I think we're talking about multiple things at the same time. And also, it is not our job to deal with with any particular issues, but I mean, there's on the one hand, there's the issue of content, and then there's the issue of attitudes towards the people who object to content, right? And those are quite separate. What do people have to say? This is not.
I can bring anybody in.
Mm-hmm.
Gregory Ward has his hand up, so I'm gonna
Go, Gregory.
bring him in. You're in, Gregory.
You're muted, Gregory. There. Okay.
Well, I can't see myself yet, so I'm not in. Now I'm in. I'm in for me now, not just for you. Sorry, that was a residual raised hand for the issue of the name, the Safe Space Committee. And as I can recall, it was really a placeholder. That is, it had that effect from the old 90s. At least that's the first time I heard the term used, that type of function. We're not, as Penny mentioned, we're not committed to it, and I'd certainly be open to alternatives. We had talked about Professional Conduct Committee. That, of course, had the unfortunate PC abbreviation, so we discarded that. No, but the name, we're not committed to that name, and I'd certainly encourage others to provide names that do not suffer from those connotations or associations that would make it seem a parody or ridiculous. That's all. I wasn't commenting on the Pinker issue.
But we'd be happy to take suggestions from anyone either now or later.
So just looking at the Q&A, and this is not the top of the list, but I think that you've been trying to answer this, but we'll just sort of point out, basically, there are a number of comments, more sort of comments and questions here, focusing on the issue of Pinker specifically, and the open letter, and whether the task force have things to say specifically about that.
Well, I mean, one thing I can say is that that probably before the open letter went out, the whole issue would have come to the Safe Space Committee or some committee or other. So the Safe Space Committee, or that is, what we need to do, and I don't know that Brian's task force has dealt with this, the whole issue of having intellectual debates on Twitter.
Yeah.
This is, and at one point an intellectual debate stops being an intellectual debate.
Right. So we didn't address that per se. We stuck fairly narrowly to the matter of the media resource page, and for that reason we were trying to develop as I said, a framework for a page that could be successful, and rather than dealing with specific issues. But one thing that we did recommend in the aftermath of the open letter and such was one specific recommendation is to do away with the category of general linguist. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Yeah, general linguistics as a quote expert. I don't like to use the term, but I'm using it here because that was the term that was conventional 8 months ago. That for someone to be to speak to the issue or to the under the general rubric of general linguistics, we thought really didn't make any sense, that was one specific point in the overall consideration of the list at the time that the Pinker affair, let's call it that, came to light.
And it didn't help that that was the top listed
Yeah.
area, so that was kind of the default.
Yeah, exactly.
And so by eliminating the media expert list, which really misdescribed what it was intended to do in the first place, because it was not intended to be a list of people who see themselves or who we see as experts, but rather who perform a service for the society.
Right.
And reconstituting it as we have done as media resources. That is a response. It's perhaps not the response that people feel is sufficient to the case under consideration, but it does respond to the issues underlying the Pinker affair.
Heidi Harley.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, I wanted to reply a little bit to some of the discussion of the Pinker affair. I think we've arrived at a term there, Larry. Thanks. So it is true that people are mean to each other on Twitter, and I am a new Twitter user myself. I got into Twitter after the summer began because I wanted to understand what was going on a little better. The Pinker letter is not about people being rude to each other on Twitter. Right. So, the junior linguists that are out there on Twitter are perfectly capable of throwing and taking all the Twitter punches you can imagine and more. It's about something bigger than that. Mm-hmm. So I resist the idea that we are going to again kind of just say that social media activity doesn't matter. The problems were not that kind of problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I talked about people being mean, I was talking about the aftermath of the letter rather than the actual content of the letter, which is a much harder issue for us to deal with, I think, and an issue that we have to deal with. And so then the question is how. Right?
Yeah. Carry on. Sorry.
Well, this would be a good moment to try to summarize a couple of questions, which I think speak to this that are anonymous. Mm-hmm. And there's a couple versions of them, but the central thrust is, given the way the junior scholars felt, the position they felt they were put in after the letter, one, and two, given the fact that among senior scholars, in the case of Pinker in particular, there are a number of existing relationships with him. There is a sense among many of the junior scholars that, to put it bluntly, they want to know how they can trust even well-meaning senior people, senior as an age, also senior as insecure. How can we be sure that they won't do the same thing again? How can we be sure, and then another version of this question is, what is the task force going to do to earn the trust of junior scholars who currently feel alienated or unacknowledged? I hope the people asking these questions don't mind me putting them together, because I think that they fit together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a really serious concern.
Well, while you're thinking about that, Jeff Good has his hand up, so I'm going to bring him.
I was hoping it was somebody else would have something smart to say about it.
Oh, yeah. I don't know about smart to say about it, but I think I want to try to say one short thing and then one longer thing as I formulate this. One, I think with respect to the Pinker affair itself, one thing we were really sensitive to, I think, as a task force was, we were appointed, and when you talk about things like sanctions or what you do with such an issue, it's a really big deal. And it seemed important for that, we thought, to be more in the hands of the elected officers, which is the executive committee. I'm not saying that's always the perfect solution per se, but those are the real elected officials. And so that's where the report says maybe they would have to appoint an ad hoc committee in very specific cases, right? I don't know what the right solution is. It's a very hard one, but the sensitivity to the idea that the elected officers were the ones who might really have to take charge of some of the most difficult issues because in principle they're elected by those things. That's one of things that was, I think, I recall, and other task force members can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the concerns we were voicing. This matter of trust, I think, is obviously a very hard one. I mean, it says, one of the questions asked what the task force will do. Out of clarity, I don't know if the task force exists after tonight, but these committees will succeed it, and hopefully, I mean, I think they just have to earn the trust by functioning well. And I think one thing that we debated and thought of, the sanctions issue was so difficult, but we realized there was a space where lots of members, maybe not even just junior members, but lots of them felt they didn't have mechanisms to really interact effectively with the leadership or with the other organs of the LSA. And so the idea was to start putting in place support systems. I think this was the kind of term we use, rather than sanction systems that may also be needed, but we really focus more on the support side. And while these things are not going to solve the Pinker Affair problem, we hope they'll create outlets through which information can sort of shift to higher levels of the LSA, maybe indirectly, through which people with serious concerns have a way to be heard, even if the resolution is not what they want. I think the task force recommendations also have the idea of kind of an ombudsperson or someone who is just a contact of, I have a problem, I don't know who to turn to in the LSA. This person's just volunteered to help them navigate it. So I guess I'm hoping the LSA can earn back some of that trust by creating effective support structures. So,
and with regard to, if I might interject, with regard to personal feelings possibly getting in the way, I think all of us are, and particularly those involved in LSA doings of one sort or another, have to recognize possibilities of conflicts of interest and essentially recuse oneself if appropriate. And maybe it would take instances where people actually take the step of recusal to demonstrate that there is that it's a trustworthy group of people in the Safe Space Committee or in the committee addressing complaints.
I also think that we have to remember that there are widely varying ideas about academic freedom, intellectual freedom, and so on. And I think people of all ages had very different attitudes about Pinker's claims and his tweets and stuff. And I think that we would be foolish to say that it's going to be easy to have some kind of a common understanding of these issues. I mean, I think we're facing something fairly difficult, and the fact that well, I don't think it's an age issue, and the fact that I may share people's ideas about those tweets, about any kinds of tweets. On the other hand, I've seen tweets that I thought sort of attack the intellectual freedom of other people that I agree with. So I think it's a much harder problem than we want it to be.
Arthur wanted to jump in.
Well,
yeah, I think that we're not really hitting the core issue with regard to Pinker. There's a problem. I was just vaguely aware of the Pinker issue, and then it came before the EC with a letter. this is what I found. I read the letter that came to the EC's attention. And then I started, perhaps foolishly, reading all of the documents related. And this is what I went through. At first, I agreed privately with the letter. Then I read another long document. Aha, they've pointed up problems in argumentation. But for me to verify that they were indeed problems in argumentation in the original letter, I would have had to go back and reread a couple of times the original letter. Then another long document comes in, and I'm sort of swaying the other way. Another document comes in, I'm sort of swaying the other way. The core issue here is resources, and this has come up with other things. Do we have enough people who have the resources and the skills? I would imagine all linguists can go through these documents and do an explication de texte or whatever you call it. But do we have the time, resources to come to some reasonable conclusion? I think there is a reasonable and justifiable conclusion to be reached in this case. But I do not think that we have enough people who can put in the time that needs to be put in to come to some kind of conclusion that would justify any kind of action. It's simply beyond our resources. There are too many issues, too many instances, or too many events, and too many documents to pour through. So basically what we have to do is to say thinking of social justice and interpersonal justice, we would like to do something based on some justifiable conclusion, but we simply don't have the resources. So what can we do? And I think we came to the point, we're at the point now where we have to do something like the AAA, American Anthropological Association, and say we would like to follow up on this, but here's why we don't have the resources. Perhaps we could say additionally, here's what we can do. And these, providing a list, are the cases where we can do something. But as it stands, I'll just sum up. We don't have the resources to analyze the documents and issues that are in the public domain. How are we going to do that? Who's going to do it? So we're stuck. I proposed a little position, which was saying we cannot do what we would like to do, and here's why. But here's a list of situations that we might be able to act on. That's what I wanted to say. I'm a little energetic today. I tried to be sleepy, but actually this is...
We'd expect no less from you, Arthur.
Hours.
Let me move to a question that has been in the queue for a while. It's been at the top of the queue for a while, and we haven't been able to get to it because of these other ones. So I want to make sure it gets asked. It's somewhat related to the question of trust, actually, because it has to do with how the workings of the Safe Space Committee or any of these committees can be visible to the membership. So let me just read it. Since a Safe Space Committee, or whatever it will end up being called, presumably is limited by confidentiality, fair treatment, etc., does this put it in the difficult position of not being able to visibly respond to publicly aired concerns, even if it's working hard to address them? And there's a follow-up from Savi Nampur-Jirupad. It's pointing out that it's related to the question of how proactive these committees can be questions of transparency, how the membership can see what the committees are working on, and establishing trust.
So all the task force members' faces are static, so it makes me think that I'm the one who has to come to this one too. Oh, hi, Tracy.
Hi, Penny. I'm feeling sorry for you right now, so I'm going to try to take a stab at this. Am I muted? Can you hear me?
No, you're okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you know, I'm listening to this, and there are a couple of things that I want to say just to be completely transparent, and I'll apologize in advance if I'm not supposed to say it, but, you know, as we were convened as a task force, we were not given the task of making a judgment about Pinker. We weren't, and we spent very little time talking about Pinker. And so I understand here that many people have come to hear what we are recommending about Pinker, and we're not recommending anything about Pinker. I personally have very strong opinions. I have no problem with doing something that would be the equivalent of a sanction, but that was not our job. And so what we did as a task force was to try to address issues like this when they come up, and others that came up in the survey that we took. And we had a few suggestions. I'm not sure that everyone who's here has had an opportunity to read the report, but the report does make suggestions about what we're calling a safe space committee that really is intended to be there as a support mechanism, to offer support to people who have issues, who have questions, who have concerns, and have no one to go to. So it is not intended to be an accountability body. It is not intended to adjudicate anything. However, there was a recommendation in the report that in particularly egregious instances, that the Safe Space Committee would pass along instances that were brought to their attention for adjudication. And I think at that point, we all just need to be honest about what that can be. Everyone is saying the LSA, the LSA. Who is the LSA? We are all the LSA. All right, if we don't hire people, we can't fire them. The most we can do is to revoke their memberships. And beyond that, I think it's our responsibility, and that's what the task force focused on, to try to be the best that we can be as an organization. So yes, oftentimes we will be reacting as a committee, the Safe Space Committee, to things that are brought to our attention. We'll also proactively look at the climate, offer workshops and webinars that respond to the climate and are relevant at that point. And I think that's the most we can do. So I don't think we should sit here and pretend that there's any more or less than that can be done in this instance. And it's frustrating, I agree. There are lots of things in the world right now that are frustrating, but we need to be honest about what we actually can do.
And I think Tracy's right that there are a lot of, we might call them practical issues, but there's a legal dimension. There's a, as Arthur was saying, a resource dimension as well to pursuing these kinds of questions. And I think to some extent that was recognized in the charges that were given to the two task forces, that try to explore the question, try to develop framework rather than address specific complaints. Because as Tracy says, and Penny made clear, the task forces were not convened to address specific complaints, but to sort of abstract away from those to look at the broader questions that they raised.
John have a
John.
Hello, everybody. So prior to this summer, I was living under a rock, not on Twitter, not paying attention to any of this stuff. Thanks to some of the younger linguists who are friends and helpful, I have gotten involved in Twitter. So 2 points. Michael and Heidi, you've been heard in an important way. And it's important for everybody on here to recognize that when I read the letter and dove more deeply into the Pinker issue, I understand the concern, the anguish, the pain, and the desire to see the LSA step up when we see something that happens that's outrageous. As a Black man, Steve was talking way out of school and way out of line. But as somebody that's about to come into a leadership position for the LSA, I recognize that this organization needs to have a lot of healing. And one of the things I was focused on most on the task force is, what do we do when something outrageous happens to not only address it, but also to help our community come together in a positive and supportive way. So I want young people to know not only that you've been heard, but to Arthur's issue of resources, I will be dropping other stuff to address these issues. Michael's point, very well taken. It was never our intention to patronize. We were trying very, very much to be listening to what the younger members meant. And Heidi, you obviously touched a nerve just by mentioning what was happening with the Pinker issue. And I want you all to know that you've been heard. I'm going to work hard on these issues, and I'm going to need your help, right? Younger people who were on here, yeah, I'm now old AF, okay? And I'll tell you who's helping me on this are my kids. My kids who are in their 30s are saying, Dad, you need to step up and do this, right? So I've been talking to my kids about this, and my kids are the ones that are saying, like, Dad, you got to be the one that's, moving the envelope in a positive direction. So my son, who many of you may have seen in the Pink video, if you go back and look at Pink's Get This Party Started, you will see my son. He was a professional actor in that video. But my son, the hipster, basically said, Dad, you have to use this opportunity to bring in the community and the younger people. You are the future of the organization. I'm going to be listening to you. We're going to be taking action. It's not going to sit still. Safe space might not be the right name, but the spirit of trying to help those who have been aggrieved is something we're going to work on. Thanks.
Thanks, John.
All right. We got, I don't know how
Norma's had her
Norma's
hand
going to
up for a
follow that
while.
up, but Norma would like to follow that up.
That's a hard one to follow. Thank you, John. I think that was really, really heartening, incredibly well put, and really needed. And I also wanted to say something about the quote unquote safe space. We could call it whatever you want, but one issue that comes up, as you know, on Twitter and elsewhere is that, I mean, maybe I'm not speaking for the committee here, but I sort of saw it myself as a kind of like a group of people that were trusted to keep your confidentiality, that you would go to figure out tough things that are happening, right? Now, our members work in all kinds of fields, right? They might be working in industry. They might be working in, like, for instance, for me, I work in an anthropology department, and I have been in administration. And sometimes the people that are messing with me are not linguists, and I don't have someone to go and talk to. But what if there were a group of people that I knew could keep a confidence, and that I knew could advise me for what to do? And that's how I saw this body, as a group of kind of trusted minds that could help you navigate something really hard. Like, you know, somebody's harassing me at my field site. What can I do? Like, my boss, you know, if you're working in industry, my boss said something really crappy. I need some advice. And that's sort of how I saw it, as a kind of counsel, a counsel. In the best possible way, that we care about you, we care about the membership. We realize that not everybody that gets that has a problem is part of the LSA, and whatever we decide will not affect people who are members of the LSA. And sometimes if you complain about somebody in the LSA, they'll just quit the LSA, right? And so your sanctions won't go anywhere because they'll have quit. And so I really, I want to make this a safe space. And even though I'm cycling off the exec board right now, I have volunteered to collect people's stories of like, what did I do when X happened? I don't know if there's an interest in that, but I think that for me, hearing the stories of people who came before me and how they confronted different issues of sexism and racism has been really, really helpful. And so, what we can offer is a sympathetic ear and years of experience in dealing with total crap. Thank you.
Thanks, Norma. And I just wanted to make a general announcement that although we were originally planning to terminate the discussion at 6:30 East, 3:30 Pacific, we are inclined to continue for 15 more minutes, but I will call last round. So, I don't know
9:30 Eastern.
9:30.
Yeah.
It's 9:30 Eastern now, but I'm suggesting 9:45. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I pushed back 3 hours.
Yeah.
I'd like to sort of follow up on what Norma said. Just a really quick thing is that by far what we asked in our survey, where they have personally experienced or witnessed crappy behavior, and by far it's in people's departments. And on the sort of the two winners are in your own department and on social media. And you have to go pretty far down to get to things like conferences. And so this ability, we can't intervene in what happens in departments, but that in departments to a great extent is where people are getting all kinds of crap. And so being able to help those people, being able to actually sort of counsel and mentor and advise or whatever people for those kinds of issues, I think is a really important thing for the field. And that does not involve anything like, there are no sanctions, right?
Okay, we do have a couple questions that I'm going to tie together that are related. So one at the top of the queue that's been there for a while. It kind of relates to the what Penny sanctioned, which Penny just mentioned. Mm-hmm. I'm going to tie that in with the second question that goes with it from Taylor Jones. So the first part is, I have a question about repercussions, which at the outset of discussion, I think this is in particular with respect to the conduct committee. I have a question about repercussions, which at the outset of discussion were de-emphasized as an option going forward, apparently for logistical reasons. What are all these proposed groups conducting their proposed activities for if they are not intended to pursue sanctions of some kind for people who violate LSA policy? Is all of this new institutional structure ultimately toothless? And just to kind of follow that up with the question from Taylor Jones, what corrective actions are the committees authorized to take? What oversight is there for the committee? Against what rubric will the committee's performance be evaluated? So a couple different questions about, what can the committees actually do, and how will we know that they're doing that well or appropriately?
Does anybody else want to address that, or am I stuck with it too?
I can answer it from the point of view of the media resources page, if that would be helpful as a starter, perhaps. Shall I, or do you want to, Penny? Do you want to?
Well, I guess I was just thinking that we didn't say that there are no sanctions. In fact, we have very specifically not taken sanctions off of the table. The problem is that anybody who wants to impose sanctions has to think really, really hard about how you actually do it, how you determine. I remember how you determine that something actionable has actually happened, and then how do you do this action? And this is something that we have to work out. And that's why we've, at the moment, this responsibility goes to an appointed committee, as I said, an appropriate committee appointed by the executive committee. So it's, you know, we can't be setting out, and I think what Arthur was saying extends big time into this. We can't be setting out in abstract a whole bunch of measures that can be taken to impose sanctions. Right? These sanctions have to, if they're going to happen, they have to come from real occurrences and real experience. Brian, did you want to?
No, I just wanted to add that I don't think it is, at least as far as what the role of the newly constituted public relations committee will be vis-a-vis the media resource list. It's not toothless. We did say that people could be removed from the page for cause, and if the public relations committee feels that dismissive behavior or attitude or the like constitutes cause, then it's there. Now it maybe is not the ultimate sanction of any sort, but it is a sanction of some sort that was built into our recommendations. So it's not completely toothless, at least on the side of the Public Relations Committee.
Okay, we have a question from Jessica Holtz.
Thank you. So I feel bad. I kind of lost it in the chat, but I remember what I said, so I will try to make it succinct. Given the things that people have just brought up about how the LSA is essentially its members, and the comments on what resources and what time do we have to really go through all of these things and address each one of them, and also what Dr. Bob brought up about how important it is for this to be more about like healing and helping, which I completely agree with. I was wondering, instead of sanctions, what about the notion of maybe giving a platform to, you know, the discourse analysts and the sociolinguists within our organization who want to take this and learn something from it and discuss, like, what can we learn about this in terms of imbalances of power, and how can we analyze what's going on on Twitter and move forward with it, and, you know, learn lessons from it. And I asked in the Q&A about there's a what's the word, preprint, I think, yeah, journal preprint, who speaks for us, lessons from the Pinker letter. I know we're moving away from the Pinker topic specifically, but I feel like because we are an organization of linguists who have all these great tools at our disposal to, you know, to analyze these things in that way, wouldn't it be great if we could maybe give discourse analysts a platform to analyze those things, and kind of, instead of that, kind of work against that imbalance of power, that certain people may have a platform and others don't, maybe even that out a little. But just a thought. Sorry, I hope that wasn't too all over the place.
No, and I think that would be entirely consistent with what Penny was saying about the educational or consciousness raising function that she and that her task force envisioned. Not putting words in your mouth, but
yeah. I would really love to see linguists getting engaged with this as linguists. Yeah, very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to just read this comment from Claire Bowern, who can't speak because her children are sleeping. I assume they're her children. Yep. So I'll just use her first person. It stands for Claire. I strongly disagree with the point about making reactive policy. there's a large body of literature and policy about how reacting once problems come up produces problematic outcomes in all sorts of different ways. The only way to have an effective response is to have a framework for evaluating problematic issues in advance. That doesn't mean endlessly detailed, quote, solution to problem X is answer Y, unquote, but it does imply having some idea about how to address issues before they arise.
Thank you.
Point, yeah.
And I just wanted to comment that I actually strongly agree with what Claire just said. I think that if you're going to be dealing with complaints and trying to handle them in a meaningful way, you have to have processes in place in advance that are well defined and well articulated. Otherwise, you're going to be inconsistent and unfair, I think, almost by design. So I think that if we are going to try to adjudicate complaints and we are going to try to impose sanctions, then we do have to have a well-defined and articulated process in advance. And I think the question that's at the core of all this is, do we have the capacity to adjudicate complaints and impose sanctions as an organization? And different people will have different views about that.
All right. At the top of the queue is a comment, not a question, but I'll read it because it's at the top. A lot of junior scholars won't have the next, quote unquote, next step in their academic careers, but they still deserve representation. Junior scholars aren't necessarily young also. And then this is going to be one that will, well, I think this question deserves a response. Another anonymous question. If we are dues paying members and our dues fund the aims and mission of the LSA, and a majority of members signed a letter that said that we didn't want this person to represent us in an organization that we paid dues to, why can that not serve as a denunciation and thus a voice of the membership? That person is now removed from any post of honor. That doesn't remove them from the organization, provided they are a member in good standing, provided they've paid their dues, but it does reflect the feelings that we as dues-paying members don't want them to represent us. Why does this have to be so hard? If a majority of the body doesn't want this person, that body has spoken, right?
Brian, my understanding was that this is completely on the table, right?
I'm sorry, what was completely on the table? That some action would be taken?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think what this question sort of presupposes is that the process, and Allison referred to and Claire Bowern before her referred to the need for sort of well-defined procedures so that there could be consistency of what I think what we wouldn't want, at least what I wouldn't want to see, is a scattershot approach where every case is decided by a different set of rules. So if the what is sort of presupposed in this question / comment is that the procedure would be a vote of the membership at large, up or down for the continuing membership of
not membership. It was said not membership, but place of honor.
Oh, place of honor. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. For the continued place of honor of any particular individual. Well, we didn't create that as a framework for deciding this. That would be one possible procedure that could be encoded in LSA policy, but that isn't an existing procedure. It isn't. So to simply say that there are that a majority of members oppose, and therefore that person shouldn't occupy any place of honor is, I mean, that is creating a procedure that hasn't been sort of decided on by a majority, let's say, of the members, or by an amendment to the LSA Constitution or bylaws. I guess I would also say that if the reference to a post of honor is the place on the media resources page, we're trying to work against the idea that this was any sort of honor, and we thought as we discussed it, we saw it more as a matter of service to the field, service to the LSA, not as the LSA recognizing someone with a particular honor.
Arguably, the question of membership among the list of fellows was also
that's different. Yeah.
I just want to step out of my earlier role and add to my role as a member of the media task force.
Please,
that,
yeah.
Just to say, second something Brian mentioned before. One of the things we hope to make clear in the outcome of this task force is that the group of people who are there to represent the field, or to be experts, to represent what we all do to the mainstream media, are not, that's not meant to be a position of honor, that's meant to be a position of service. Brian just said that. But we recognize that in de facto, being a member of that group, they stand for the rest of us in some way. So this is the needle that we're trying to thread here, and the hope is that the outcome of this process will be one in which the people in that group, the people who are the ones who will talk to the mainstream media about issues of linguistics, will represent in a lowercase r the diversity of the society, the range of scholarship we do, the different levels of experience in the field. That the primary thing should be that they're really good at talking to the media, or they can become very good as part of that job. But we want to try to de-emphasize the idea that this is somehow some special honor that people get. It was never intended to be that way, but we totally acknowledge that that's how it became perceived. So we hope we can kind of do a reset here.
Yeah.
Well, thanks.
Sorry, I'm switching roles.
Thanks, Chris. Unless there's some pressing question from someone who's been at the top of the queue for many hours, I think we should probably draw the discussion to a close, and thank everyone for your participation, and hope that the windows and doors of communication will remain open. And please let us know. We'll be meeting again and again as an executive committee. I don't know if we will be renaming the Safe Space group or what that will look like. But we will be moving forward from here, and we very much appreciate your present and future input. Anyone want to add anything else?
Oh, just that it was a very enlightening and interesting evening.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your questions and your comments.
And we have the contributions to the chat, which will be very useful to us, and the Q&A. So enjoy the rest of your evening and week.
Thanks, Larry, for emceeing.
Yeah, and Chris, good job.
Chris,
You did a great job.